Let's bring in Jeff Van Gundy now to put into perspective a little bit more the career of Tim Duncan. Jeff, when you first heard the news, I'm sure you've been asked to sort of put Tim Duncan into the pantheon of NBA greats. Where does he fit in for you?
You know, I really try to stay away from the comparison part, Jay, but I would say this, unquestionably a top 10 player of all time. And when you add in his basketball character to the whole equation, he doesn't take a backseat to anyone who's ever played the game. This guy, not only productive, but I thought brought in, along with Steve Nash, a different leadership style for a best player, not the driving force where he's always on his teammates to do more, but more of an encouraging leadership style, which I think he and Nash perfected.
Jeff, in an era where egos are just part of the package, with superstar players in particular, he never had one. Talk about him being a coach's dream.
Well, I think he had the right amount of ego, Jay. I think you have to have ego to be a great all-time player in any league, but particularly in the NBA where the competition is so stiff. And so I think he had the right handle on how much ego. And he had team ego more than self-ego. And I think if you ask Greg Popovich, he'll always be indebted to Duncan because when you have one of the all-time greats play for you, they either give you credibility or they snatch your credibility away, not only by how they perform, but how they deal with you and how they accept coaching. And one of the great things for me is to always watch Duncan get coached hard. When he got coached hard by Popovich, whether it was in practice or games, he didn't necessarily always like it or agree with it, but he always took it. And when your best player takes hard coaching, every other player falls into line. And I think Duncan's coachability was one of the highest I've ever seen from an all-time great player.
We talk about players sort of matching the personality of their coach, and certainly Pop and Duncan were a perfect fit for one another, but also the city for which he played, San Antonio, similar to Tim Duncan's personality and style. Perhaps a little underrated, but they seem to be a perfect match, San Antonio and Tim Duncan.
They were, but I would say this. I think he would have been a perfect match whichever city he would have gone to because he had his, he was humble enough to be as great as he was and perform regardless of where he played. And to me, what's interesting about Duncan and the Spurs, more than how much they won, the 5 championships they won when Duncan played, was how they handled losing. The last 2 years are a great example. They lose in the first round of the Clippers in a tough Game 7 where Chris Paul hits a terrific shot, and then they lose. They were an all-time regular season team this year, 67 wins, and they lose in a second round in a hard-fought series to Oklahoma City. And they handled the losing with as much dignity and class as they did with the winning. And to me, Duncan was at the forefront of that with Greg Popovich. They knew how to lose as well as knew how to win. And I always admired how they handled those types of setbacks.
Well, the start of their title runs, 1999 against your New York Knicks. What do you most remember about Tim in that series?
Him busting our butt night after night. Yeah, that's what I remember. And you know how he rests today. Like how they monitored his minutes.
Sure.
A lot, right? I wish they would have done that back in '99. We would have had a fighting chance. Unfortunately, he was playing like 40 minutes a night, and we had no answer for him. And you think about that team. That team was on struggle in that lockout year to start the year, and there were rumblings, that there might be a coaching change. And then they had this great run, I think the last maybe 35 games of that regular season. Elliott made the great shot against Portland at home to win a game, and they just sort of ran through the playoffs. They were a great team not necessarily talent-wise on the perimeter. They were very average to below average on the perimeter. But up front, he and Robinson were terrific. And I think, the thing that also I admire about San Antonio, it's so many things. I admired how Robinson gracefully stepped into the background as Duncan ascended. And then Duncan did the same thing. As he was getting older, he turned it first over to Parker and Ginobili and played more of a role offensively. And then when Kawhi Leonard and then Aldridge came aboard, he took another step back. And handling that gracefully is very challenging for an all-time great player, and Duncan mastered it.
Jeff, if you would, talk about his fundamentals and how they were so important to him as a player, and how when he would look at a perceived weakness in his game, he would work to improve in that area.
Well, Tim Duncan was coached so very well by Dave Odom at Wake Forest. He came into the league ready-made to play and excel right off the bat. And as you talked about, you don't do that unless you're fundamentally sound, and he was. And the one fundamental that he got appreciably better at throughout his career was his passing. When he first came into the NBA, he was not a great passer, particularly out of double teams. But by the end of his career, he was an outstanding passer. And I think it's that diligence and the discipline to try to work on things on your non-strengths. And Duncan did that throughout his career, kept evolving as a player, kept improving, and then, figured out what he had to do to help his team be the best possible they could be. Incredible admiration for his basketball career and character.
It's interesting. The game seems to be changing, and it evolved during his career from their first championship to their last championship. And you talk about the gracefulness in which the torch was passed from Robinson to Duncan and Duncan to Leonard and this new group. How important in the total legacy of Tim Duncan is the different teammates that he played with throughout his years? He was able to win with a lot of different combinations.
Yes, and in a lot of different roles. And I think that's a big factor. We've had some all-time greats, but they could never play a lesser role. That just wasn't within them. Duncan probably had a hard time with lesser minutes and lesser role, but you never saw it. And you never let it impact his game or their game. And to win like San Antonio has won, I mean, the number of 50-win seasons, the winning records on the road year after year after year, the ability to dominate at home, it's just incredible. And like I said before, Jay, listen, they won in his 19 years 5 championships, right? But they didn't win 14 years. And I was as impressed with the 14 years where they didn't win by how they handled it as an organization, as a best player, and as a coach, as I was in their 5 years that they did win, because they never let losing divide them or disappointment divide them. They came back recharged, re-energized, and they always gave their best. And I thought more than any organization in the NBA, they absolutely win with class and they lose with class.
A model organization and certainly a model superstar for the ages. 19-year career of Tim Duncan comes to an end today. During those 19 years, the Spurs won 71% of their games. No team in pro sports over that same stretch won as much.